I was listening to an older CD a couple of years ago, and there was a long discussion on the topic of that Abraham said this, and then someone asked to clarify it, and I still didn't hear the answer. And the question was, or the statement that Abraham made was that the path of least resistance isn't always the easiest. And I've listened to that 3 or 4 times, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around that.
Well, let's talk about it from the perspective that we've been talking about here, because we talked about the path of books that we've written, and the discussion points that were at the basis of each of those books. And even recently, as we were talking about this vortex, saying get in the vortex, even wrote a book called Getting into the Vortex. It implies, and we mean it, that there's just one big, really good vortex that you want to get into. But every thought that you think sets things in motion. And so today, while we want you to know that there is this vortex that Source is focused upon that is so dominant, we also want you to acknowledge that there are other vortices that you've set into motion, sort of streams. Man's negative thought has created a lot of different scenarios that if you get, because of whatever vibrational disc you're choosing in this now powerful point of attraction, if you get on the Henri disc, you're going to be gathering from a vibrational reality that is not the vibrational reality that Source is tending to.
So if you're on the ornery disc, the path of least resistance of orneriness is not going to be easy.
Well, let us finish this thought out, and then maybe that's where you'll end up, but we have something more clarifying to explain to you. So in the same way that we were talking about the vortex, and then later explained that there are a lot of vortices because every thought has set something into motion that will manifest if you get your momentum going toward it. So there was a time when we were talking about the path of least resistance, like we were talking about the vortex, that there is a path toward what you want and who you are. Right. But there are paths toward those other vortices too. In other words, sometimes you get on one of those paths towards something that you do not want, and the tug of war that is within you. In other words, what we were trying to define is, it's the leverage. We almost got to that point in the last conversation. It's a sentence that we want to insert in the beginning of this conversation, that the path of least resistance is created by the momentum of law of attraction. And we want to say that there is such leverage in alignment, because when you tap into the frequency of who you really are, the momentum of that energy is so momentous that the power of it is nearly indescribable. In other words, tapping into this source energy and flowing it towards something is so much more powerful than being out there on that raw and ragged edge of orneriness and trying to make things happen through your action and words and behavior. In other words, you just can't demand things into place like you can appreciate things into place. There's so much more leverage in that. And so that is what that discussion was about, is that sometimes the path of least resistance is taking you to where you don't want to go, but you can never let this source that is always calling you never lets go of you, never lets go of you. So when you're on that path towards something that you do not want, even though you're on this path of least resistance because that's the vibration that you've got going, it doesn't feel good. It's only when you're on the path of who you really are and what you're really wanting that you feel ease and flow about it. Is that clear?
Yes.
So is it confusing that there are vortices all over the place that you've set into motion because of thoughts that you've been thinking? Makes sense, doesn't it? Right. There are all kinds of things ready to pop into reality depending upon what you're giving your attention to. And the path of least resistance, when someone says, it feels like my thoughts are thinking me, that's a path of least resistance. But this is for sure, for sure, for sure. When you are on a path of least resistance towards something unwanted, there's negative emotion present within you, letting you know that you are moving away from, not toward, who you really are and what you really want.
Very good.